Welcome to Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. Today we have two special guests. We have Ton and FJ Ray. FJ Ray. We're going to work on Ton's GX470 2008. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a transmission flush on his automatic transmission. Ton bought his 2008 GX470 used. It had about 176,000 miles on it. Now he has about 184,000 miles on it. And he doesn't know the complete maintenance history of this rig. He's a little concerned about the transmission fluid, so we're gonna now renew the whole thing. If you have a transmission with an unknown history and maybe the transmission was abused by the previous owner or owners and the fluid was never renewed, then it might not be the best idea to do a full flush. It might be better off to do just a pan, drain and refill, and then wait a certain amount of miles and do another one, because there's been enough people that have said that after a full flush on a transmission that was obviously abused with really dark and stinky fluid, after the full flush they experienced some slipping problems or shifting problems. And there's some different theories out there. The main one that I kind of prescribe to is that when you have an abused transmission, that transmission is going to have sludge built up in it, and then when you dump out all the old fluid and you add a bunch of fresh, brand new fluid that has very good detergent qualities to it, those detergent qualities are going to start working on those sludge deposits. They can break free, and then they can travel through the transmission and get lodged in a fluid passageway like in the valve body, and then you starve an area of your transmission of fluid and you have issues. So some people believe that, others don't believe that that's an issue, that you can just do a full flush and you don't have to worry about the fact that the fluid was black and the transmission was really abused. But I'm going to err on the side of caution. After we do the initial drain of Ton's transmission pan and we see the color of the fluid, that's going to dictate where we go next. If it looks pretty good, then what we're going to do is a similar situation that we've done on a third generation 4Runner. We're going to take the return line off the transcooler, off the radiator. We're going to put another line on there that's longer. That's going to go into a bucket with graduated quart marks. We're going to start the vehicle. We're going to drain a quart out, stop it, and then we're going to pump a quart in through the fill plug, because on these sealed type of transmissions, there's no dipstick, so you actually have to fill it like you'd fill a manual transmission. There's a plug up on the upper part of the passenger side of the transmission. You have to remove that plug and then you can pump in a quart, and then we're going to go back and forth. Start the vehicle, drain a quart out, stop the vehicle, add a quart in through the fill plug, and keep on doing that till we've added about 12 quarts, because that's the capacity. So at about the 12th quart, when we're seeing the fluid go into the graduated food grade container, we're going to see that that fluid's coming out clean, letting us know, okay, yeah, we've exchanged enough quarts, and now we can stop the process and then go to the fluid check procedure that we'll go through at the end of the video. So without further ado, we're going to get started with this. You're going to have to get your skid plates out of the way. We're not going to show that because that's pretty basic. All you got to do is take a multitude of 12mm bolts out and get the front and rear skid plates out of the way. We're going to get Ton's GX470 in the garage on relatively flat ground, and we're going to drain the pan. To start this process, we're going to drain the transmission pan into this food grade 18 quart container. You can see the graduated level marks. According to the factory service manual, a pan drain's only going to get out about 2 quarts. So I'm kind of curious to see if that's accurate, because when I do a drain on the pan on my third generation 4Runner, I get closer to like 4.5 quarts. So I'm kind of curious if this is accurate and it's only going to get out 2 quarts. Here's the bottom of your transmission pan. You have your drain plug, and then you have the overflow plug. You could differentiate between the two because the overflow plug is a 5mm Allen, and this one has a 14mm head, so that's the difference. Ton's gonna get on here with the 14mm socket and 3/8 ratchet. He's gonna take this out, and we're gonna drain it into this container right here. That's looking pretty black, isn't it? Uh-huh. Okay, it's draining. and we're just gonna let this drain for a while and then see how much comes out. Now that we have the fluid draining, just to get a little bit more airflow and maybe facilitate the rest of the draining, I'm gonna show you where the fill plug is on this transmission. This is an A750F transmission. Here's the cross member, and this is the transmission mount. And then you could see the exhaust crossover pipe right here. And then if you go right above where the transmission mount bolts to the transmission on the passenger side, if you look up here, you'll see it. It's right there. It's a 24 millimeter. And so Tom's gonna get on there with a 1/2-inch drive ratchet, 24 millimeter socket, and loosen that. This plug has a rubber O-ring on it, so you'll find even though you broke it free, you have to turn it quite a bit to where the rubber O-ring isn't hindering you, and then you could spin it out with your hand. And there's the plug out. You can see the black O-ring right there, and that's what's keeping you from being able to spin it out once you break it free with your socket. You have to use the ratchet just a little bit more than usual to spin this plug out because of the O-ring. So we're gonna get the drain plug back in. You wanna use a new drain plug crush washer. With the crush washer, it has a flat side and a rounded side. You want the rounded side that crushes down facing the transmission pan and the flat side facing the bolt. And then just get that sucker back in there. The torque spec for the drain plug and for the overflow plug is 15 foot-pounds. What I've learned over time is I kind of cringe at these torque values. I usually go by feel with drain plugs and fill plugs, and I've never stripped one. I'm just gonna go by feel, and when you're tightening this, you're gonna feel that crush washer start to crush down, and then it's gonna start cinching up. And then I choke up on a wrench like this. I don't use the full length of this. I choke up on it to get less mechanical advantage. And that's tight enough, according to my torque elbow. But if you wanted to torque this to spec, it's 15 foot-pounds. So this is what we drained out, right about 2 quarts. So the factory service manual was correct that drain of the pan only produces about 2 quarts. And this fluid is black as night, black as molasses. And that's not good. That is not a good sign. So this tells Ton that his transmission wasn't taken care of very well by the previous owner. This transmission maybe never even had one fluid change. So now we have to make a decision. Ton is now consulting on the phone with a buddy of his that owns a transmission shop. He's gonna get his opinion. Should we go for the full flush, or should we do it more gradually with a series of drain and refills over a certain amount of miles? So we'll get back to you with our decision. And the decision is, we decided we're gonna go for the full flush, even though the fluid is in obvious bad shape. I know what I said at the beginning of the video, that we're gonna let the fluid color determine which way we're gonna go. When you think about how many drain and refills of the pan it's gonna take to renew all the fluid, it's gonna take 6, because you're only getting 2 quarts out at a time, and you're gonna have to go through the fluid check procedure each drain and refill. You're thinking like, we're just gonna step up to the craps table, grab the dice, roll them, and hopefully we roll lucky 7s, and everything's gonna be good with the transmission when we're done with the flush. So double fingers crossed, we're gonna go for it, and you're gonna see the result. Hopefully it's gonna be all good, and Tom's gonna be having a transmission that's shifting a lot better without any shuddering like he was experiencing before. Now that we've drained 2 quarts out of the pan, we're gonna fill the system with 2 quarts. To do that, we're gonna use this Motive power fill pump. It's a style of pump that, if you're familiar with like spraying your garden with weeds, you fill the fluid and you put the cap back on, and then you pump this sucker up, and then you get it to about, I think about 15 PSI is about good, but maybe a little higher. And then what we did is we added a quart, and we showed where that ended up filling the container. And then we added a 2nd quart, 3rd quart, 4th quart, 5th quart. So I'm gonna fill 2 quarts into the system through the fill plug and drain this down to the 3 mark. And then we're gonna go to the next step. So if you look at this, it has just a little 1/4 turn valve. So once I get this tip into the fill plug, I turn this yellow handle in line, and it'll start dispensing the fluid. All right, we're gonna start filling. How's the pressure doing here? Still flowing, still flowing. Okay, that's about 3. So we've now added 2 quarts via the fill plug, and now we're going to go on to the next step. So now what we're going to do is disconnect the return hose for the transmission cooling system. Underneath the center of the radiator, you have 2 metal lines that run to 2 rubber lines. And what I determined just by looking at the temperature of the fittings on the side of the transmission, the upper fitting is the return line and the bottom fitting is the send line. It sends the hot fluid to be cooled by the transmission cooler. So this GX470 comes stock with an external cooler, and the way the fluid flows is it leaves the transmission on the send line, and then it turns back into a rubber hose, and this rubber hose goes to the top fitting on the passenger side where the radiator transmission cooler is. So the fluid enters the top port and then it leaves the bottom port and goes into this rubber line, connects up to this metal hard line, which is the lower hard line that attaches to this cross member underneath the radiator. It routes to the driver's side and then it turns back into a rubber line. That rubber line then goes to the external cooler in front of the AC condenser. It fills from the bottom port and then it leaves that external cooler on the top port, and then it comes back on this rubber line right here, and then it goes through this metal hard line, and then it goes back to a rubber line that then attaches to the metal hard line that runs back to the transmission. And that metal hard line is the upper line. So that's a down and dirty of how this transmission cooler system works. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna disconnect this return rubber line off of this metal line, and we're gonna hook up a 3/8 inch transmission hose in replace of it and direct that hose into the graduated food grade container. So these hoses are attached with constant tension clamps. I'm going to use my bent nose needle nose pliers, compress it and move it back. And then I'm going to use a small pick tool. I'm going to get in between the hose and the fitting and help break it free. So I'm going to get my catch container underneath here and then pull this hose off. I know I was going to let that drain a little bit. So now I'm going to slip over this 3/8 line. You could get this at any auto parts store. I'm not even going to put a clamp on that. I'm just going to leave that as is. And then I'm going to direct the hose into this container. Ton's going to get inside the rig. He's going to start it up. And then when it gets close to another quart draining into this food grade container, I'm going to tell him to stop, and then I'm going to go over to the side of the transmission and pump in another quart through the fill plug using that pump. Okay, I'm going to have Ton start the engine. Right now we're just a little bit over 2 quarts, and I'm going to let it get to the next line, which is the 3 quart mark. So go ahead and start it, Ton. Stop. So you have to stop a little bit before you get to the next line, and that was almost perfect. And so now we've drained out another quart, and now I'm going to go over to the side of the transmission just like you saw earlier. I'm not going to show it, and I'm going to pump in another quart. All right, I added a quart via the fill plug. Now Ton's going to start it up again, and we're going to drain out another quart and bring it up to the 4 quart mark. Go ahead, Ton. Stop. And so you get the idea. We're not going to bore you with doing this over and over again, but when we get to the 12 quart mark, we're going to show you how much cleaner the fluid coming out of the hose is, letting us know and letting you know that we've now fully flushed all the old dirty fluid out and we've got clean fluid in there. Now, some people say, oh, you shouldn't do a flush, but we're not using a machine to flush the fluid out. We're just using the pump on the transmission. So we're not forcing any abnormal pressure into the transmission. This is just using the pump to move the fluid for us like it normally does. So you don't have to worry about it dislodging deposits in the pan or somewhere else in the transmission, like the valve body. It's just operating like it normally does with the normal transmission pump moving the fluid. So we're not worried about dislodging anything, doing the flush in this manner. One thing we didn't mention yet is we are using the approved fluid for this from Toyota. It's the WS. And you can get this from your local Toyota dealer, or you can get this from online sellers as well. We'll put a link in the video description. So we've now exchanged 11 quarts, and we're gonna go for a 12th quart, and we're gonna show the color of the fluid that is coming out from this hose. And you're gonna see that it's gonna be looking a lot pinker and not this dark chocolate molasses. So go ahead, Ton. That's looking pretty pink, but I think we might go for a 13th quart just to make sure. Stop. So I'm gonna go ahead and add another quart, and we're gonna do it one more time. That's coming out pretty darn clean looking. Stop. I'm liking the look of that. So after that 13th quart, I'm pretty happy with the color of the fluid. And so now what we're gonna do is go through the fluid check procedure. And I'll show you the pages right out of the factory service manual that I downloaded from the Toyota Tech Info site. And I'll give a good explanation of what the manual says, how you do it. We're gonna go through the fluid level procedure with you. This is straight out of the factory service manual, Tech Info. They say to circulate the fluid, so you allow the engine to idle with the air conditioning off. You move the shift lever through the entire gear range to circulate the fluid. And you allow the engine to idle until the fluid temperature reaches 97 degrees Fahrenheit. And then we go to the fluid temperature check procedure. Now they talk about using an intelligent tester. Most people aren't going to have that. That's for like Toyota technicians. So let's go to the procedure when you don't have an intelligent tester. And this procedure is when you don't have an ability to check your transmission temperature. If you have a scan gauge or another way to view your transmission temperature, then you won't need to do this. But if you don't have a way to read your transmission temperature, this is how you would do it. You need to jump a couple of the terminals at the OBD2 reader inside your vehicle. It shows you from the wide section of the connector, you go 4 over from the left. They call that the CG connector. And then the other one you have to connect is the TC connector. That's 5 over from the left. So pin 4 and pin 13 need to be jumped. I don't know of a jumper that works for that, so you could use a paper clip. It can't be one of the cheap paper clips that has like a coating. It has to be an actual steel type of paper clip so it gets a good connection. I talked to Joey at Wits End, and he's talking about making one for people to be able to use for this application, so we might have a link for you in the future. So once you jump those connectors, you slowly move the shift lever from park to low, and then you return it to park. You basically shift through all the gears and then back to park. And then what you do is you move the shift lever to drive, and then you quickly move it back and forth from neutral to drive, once within a 1.5 second interval for at least 6 seconds, and this will activate the fluid temperature detection mode. The automatic transmission oil temp warning light remains illuminated for 2 seconds, and then it turns off. Then you allow the engine to idle until the fluid temperature reaches 97 degrees. The oil temp light will come on again when the fluid temperature reaches 97 degrees, and then it will blink when it exceeds 115. You want to check your fluid level when you're between 97 degrees and 115. That is the range. And then when it comes to checking the fluid level, with the engine running, you remove the overflow plug, and then you check to see that fluid drains out of the overflow tube, and then you wait till the flow becomes a trickle, and then you reinstall the plug and you lock it down and you're good. If fluid didn't come out of the overflow, then you would add a little bit of fluid, 0.4 liters or 0.2 quarts, a quarter of a quart. Then you would repeat that procedure until you get fluid flowing out of the hole, and then once you do, you let it get down to a trickle, and then you close the plug and you're done with the fluid level procedure. Before we go through the fluid check procedure, I'm going to want to reconnect the cooler hose I disconnected. So I'm going to pull off the 3/8 hose that I put on there for the drain procedure, and then I'm going to want to get the regular hose back on. So I just got to compress the constant tension clamp and get it back in place. And that's good to go. All right, now that I've explained the fluid check procedure based off of what the factory service manual says, I'm gonna have Ton start the vehicle, and we have to get the transmission fluid up to that range of 97 to 115 degrees. We're gonna choose to get it to the middle of the spec. So 97 to 115 is an 18 degree range, and halfway through the range is 9 degrees, so 9 plus 97 is 106. So we're gonna get the transmission temperature up to 106, and then I'm going to get underneath the vehicle. I'm going to open up the overflow plug, and hopefully if we added enough fluid during the flush procedure, I'm going to see fluid come out of the overflow plug. I'm going to let it get down to a trickle. I'm going to put the overflow plug back in with a fresh crush washer and torque it to 15 foot-pounds or just by feel. So when you do this, it's going to take a while just idling to get the transmission temperature up to that range. So you're going to be sitting here for a while. The way we're going to be able to see the accurate transmission temperature is with a scan gauge tool. And we're borrowing FJ Ray's scan gauge because he has the same transmission on his FJ Cruiser, and his scan gauge is already programmed for this A750F transmission. Now we're going to start it up. We're going to be watching the scan gauge and get it up to 106 degrees Fahrenheit. Another thing that we're going to want to do as soon as Ton gets the vehicle started, he's going to want to go through all the gears. So he's going to go from park to reverse to neutral to drive to third to second to low, and then back up one gear at a time all the way back up the park. So that gets the fluid circulating through the whole automatic transmission. And then we just got to sit here and wait for the temperature to get up to that sweet spot. Go ahead, Ton. So here's the scan gauge, and right now the temperature is at 100. It's labeled TFT for trans fluid temperature. This scan gauge doesn't automatically come pre-programmed for a GX470 or for an FJ Cruiser for transmission temperature, but you can go on the scan gauge website and then you can look up the codes and program it yourself. Another trick to get the temperature up a little bit quicker is you put it in drive, and that puts a little bit of a load on the transmission, and then it will get up quicker. We're right about the sweet spot of 106 we were looking at, and I'm going to get underneath the rig. The temperature is at 109. I'm going to open this up. This is the overflow plug, 5mm plug. We don't have it high enough, so we're going to stop the vehicle and add a little bit of fluid. Shut it off, Ton. I added a little bit of fluid, about a half a quart. And now I'm going to open this back up, and hopefully we're going to see fluid coming out. Nope, shut it down. When we first checked it, when the temperature got up to the right temperature, we opened the overflow plug and nothing came out. I added a half a quart. We did the procedure again and still nothing came out. So now I added another half a quart, and let's see where we're at. Okay, the temperature is at 105. I'm gonna let it get up just a little bit higher. Let me know when it gets to 106. 107? Yeah. Okay, the temperature is at 107. I'm gonna take out the overflow plug again and let's see what happens. Hopefully we're gonna see fluid dripping out. Okay, that's what we wanna see. So now I'm gonna wait till this gets to a trickle, and then I'm gonna close it off. Okay, it's down to a trickle. I'm gonna close it off. Tighten this up. The torque spec for this overflow plug is the same as the drain plug. It's 15 foot-pounds, but I'm just gonna go by feel with this 1/4-inch ratchet. The last thing you need to do after you get the fluid to the right level and you lock down the overflow plug to the proper torque spec is you wanna get your fill plug back in and torque that to spec. The spec is 29 foot-pounds. That does have a rubber O-ring. I'm guessing Toyota recommends you change it every time, but I looked at that rubber O-ring on that fill plug and it looked intact, so I didn't see any reason to replace that rubber O-ring on the fill plug. So just either get it to the torque spec of 29 foot-pounds or use your torque elbow or use that spec we all know and love. good and tight, and you're pretty much done. Now we're gonna have Ton take this on a test drive, and hopefully, fingers crossed, he's gonna report everything's shifting fine, because we just now exchanged out all the fluid in his system, which was very dark and nasty, with some nice, brand new, fresh Toyota WS fluid. All right, we are all done with this job. Ton got back from his test drive and he reported some good news, and I'm gonna let Ton describe the difference he has felt with the shifting of his transmission after this full flush. Here's Ton.
So before the flush, my transmission would shift at any speed below 40 miles per hour. When it would shift between 4th and 5th gear, it would feel as if you were driving on washboard roads. That's gone. I driven, I don't know, probably a good 5 miles, and I didn't feel it. So to me, that's a really good thing. It actually shifts better. Could be something in my head, mental, but it feels better to me.
I would say there's a good chance that it's all in his mind, because I know Ton, he is pretty mental. Just kidding, just kidding. You hear that in the background? That's a blower. Somebody's doing yard work and ruining our video, but that's just the way it goes at the Timmy the Toolman Studios. As you saw, the procedure is not all that hard. You first drain the pan of what's in the pan, and that's about 2 quarts from what we saw. Then you take off the rubber return line hose, you put your own 3/8 transmission hose on there and direct that into a food grade container with graduated quart marks. You drain out a quart, you fill a quart with whatever pump you have. I recommend that Motive pump. Ton was the guy who actually turned me on to that Motive pump, and I love that thing. That thing's awesome. It's better than using one of those little hand pumps where you're like pumping forever and you're getting a workout. You do have to pump it, but then you have a lot of time where you're just opening up the quarter turn valve and it works for quite a long time, and then you do have to pump it up again, but not quite the workout as those little mini pumps are. And then you just keep on doing that. Drain a quart, add a quart, drain a quart, add a quart, until you get to about the 12 quart mark. And at that mark, you should see that the fluid coming out of that drain hose looks pretty damn clean, because you have just now effectively exchanged the whole system. The whole system holds about 12 quarts. If you want to go for a 13th quart or 14th quart, go for it. We ended up doing a little bit over 13 quarts. That's our best guesstimate. When we got to the fluid level check procedure, when I opened up that overflow plug, why did we find fluid didn't come out? Well, it could be one of a couple things. Number one, we could have been draining out more than we were adding back in because our procedure wasn't exactly perfect. Another possibility is the fluid on Ton's transmission could have been low to begin with, because he's never checked it. That's another possibility. But regardless, the important thing is that you get it up to that proper temperature between 97 and 115 degrees Fahrenheit. You open up the overflow plug. If you don't see fluid coming out, add in a little bit more, about anywhere from like a quarter of a quart to a half a quart. Get the transmission temperature up to that range again from 97 to 115. We chose the middle of the spec, about 106, 107, and then open up the overflow plug again, and hopefully you'll see that it pours out. You let it get down to a trickle, and then you tighten up the overflow plug with a brand new crush washer, torque it to 15 foot-pounds, or use your torque elbow, or that German spec of good and tight, and you're all good to go. And then you just have to take it for a test drive, and hopefully you're going to find out, like Ton found out, that his transmission is shifting a lot better with some nice fresh WS fluid from Toyota. We did phone a guy that we know in the area. His name is Henry. He owns a business called Precision Transmissions in Milpitas, and he was giving us his recommendations when he does a service on a transmission. And he says he just goes ahead and drops the pan and replaces the filter on the transmission. You can't go wrong with that logic. Is it a safe bet to do that? Sure. You're never going to go wrong by replacing the filter. But what I found is that those filters aren't like a regular kind of paper filter you'd see on like a General Motors car or other type of American Motors car. That's a fine mesh metal screen, and the chances of that thing getting really blocked up and needing to be replaced is debatable. I kind of think that even when the transmission is kind of abused like Ton's transmission was, do we really have to drop the pan and replace the transmission filter? I don't know. One of the deciding factors is that we are planning on doing a valve body upgrade on Ton's GX470, so we're going to have to drop the pan for that. So that would be the opportune time to replace the filter. So I didn't feel like doing the pan drop right now, knowing that we're going to have to do that in the near future. If we get this custom valve body and transmission lockup kit and custom transcooler from Valley Hybrids. He sources them from Australia, and so we're trying to work out a deal to where we can get that done, and hopefully you'll be seeing that video in the future. With all that said, we thank you for watching Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean, and special guest Ton, and our very helpful helper FJ Ray. He was our cameraman for a lot of this. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you have any questions or comments, do that below. Take care. Bye-bye. Sick mods and sick transmission flushes on a GX470. Peace out. Happy wrenching. Bye-bye.